Still don't believe me that folk tales tell us all about how the psyche works? Check out Rumplestiltskin, aka Tale 500 from the ATU typing system. This this folk tale is called The Name of the Supernatural Helper in this system. Here's the story. A parent boasts that his daughter can spin gold or an impossible amount of yarn. Or, in other versions of the story, a mother beats her daughter because she's, quote, lazy. Well, as a result, the king investigates. He just shows up one day. And trying to figure out what's going on here, he locks her in a room to spin, whether it would be for gold or additional amounts of twine or whatever. It depends on the version. Now, here's the conflict. If she fails, she'll be put to death. If she succeeds, the king gets to marry her, or she gets to marry the king. She cries. Next thing that happens, as she's left alone in the castle room, a supernatural being or a little man of some kind shows up and says he'll help her. But she must give him her firstborn if she can't name him. In some variants of the story, she has to remember his name after a very long time, depending on where you're looking at, which type of story you're looking at. So after a couple of different tries, she passes the test and eventually she becomes the queen. But of course, then a year later, as she has her firstborn child from the union, the little man comes along and says, guess what? Time to pay up. Well, the name is discovered eventually by either the king or a servant or the daughter herself. And interestingly enough, the name is discovered when whoever it is that's looking for the name of the character is roaming the forest, and they find him dancing to himself, and he says the name. He reveals what his name is. So then when he comes back to collect, she says, your name is this, Rumpelstiltskin, and the one that most people in the West are familiar with. And then at which point he either vanishes or he sinks down into the earth. So variants of this story have been found all over Europe, Finland, the Middle East, Russia, China, Japan, Africa, and the Americas. This is one of these world folk tales. So what is it all about? The thing is that folk tales wind up representing common intrapsychic dynamics, universal intrapsychic dynamics, through their symbolic representations and narratives. This is an idea that's been around for a long time, but I think now we have even more information to back this up than we have in the past. So complexes form in the face of trauma. They split off of the ego as ego-independent attempts at efficient adaptation that can then work offline to preserve precious conscious ego resources. They initially serve adaptation and protection, kind of like the immune system, which also acts unconsciously, by the way. The problem with complexes, of course, is that they can go on for too long and they can take on an autoimmune character. All of this, including the solution to toxic complexes, is expressed in folktales like Rumpelstiltskin, and the folktale depiction of it is much richer because it is in images rather than a dry analysis or text. So what is going on in this folktale? So the problem starts with an unrealistic expectation of achievement from the parent. And that's either you're too lazy or the parent's boasting that the daughter can produce limitless amounts of gold from spinning yarn. So then the king shows up. All right, so this is signifying now that we're entering into an inner world when we have larger than life characters like the king. And he says, guess what? You have to achieve or die. Another thing the king represents too is the wider culture as a whole. So it's kind of an inner and an outer Janus-faced kind of symbol, very common in symbol work. But what is going on here? Well, this is a great picture of perfectionism, all or nothing. Either I succeed and I marry the king, which is definitely moving up in the world, or I die. So when you're put into this impossible either or that perfectionism can do, sometimes a complex will show up, very creative complex, to conjure up some kind of way out of this mess. And in the folktale, that is represented by the little man's ability to create endless amounts of yarn or spin the yarn into gold if you're looking at a culture that uses gold. But of course, there's a severe cost to this future creativity, and it's a severe cost to future creative energy in the form of firstborn child, also creative. This is why the protagonist of this story has to be female. Complexes, now they form and they can help, but after a while they take a heavy toll on the ego. So I think it's very interesting that the dynamics of this story follow along once you understand what the symbols are representing. These are universal narratives. And isn't it an interesting coincidence that they just so happen to match the well-known dynamics of the psyche in psychodynamic terms? In other words, how complexes behave in psychotherapy and in general in life. Now, here's the interesting solution that the folktale also tells us. And this is the thing that science sometimes is still trying to figure out, or psychotherapy. This folktale says you have to name the complex. So what might that be a symbol of? So naming it means understanding and pinpointing its full context. And this is, again, not surprisingly, I guess at this point, exactly what you have to do with complexes. At least that's the first step anyway. You have to name it. You have to say, this is where this comes from. This complex is doing this because of A, B, and C. In this case, it's coming from an excessive expectation of productivity and achievement that is being placed on the child, developing ego. Naming here means identifying the full context. That's what a name is, actually. But how do you discover it? Folktale tells us that too. You have to go into the forest where it lives. You have to go in there and really deeply understand where it comes from and its context. And again, it uses the forest because that's a great metaphor for outside the ego. So non-ego consciousness, the dark forest. You see it all the time over and over again. In dreams and in folk tales, we get the same kind of imagery here. So this is a very concrete way of describing the very complex and nuanced process of coming to a full understanding of a complex. But it's super vivid because of the fun and very powerful imagery. Now, all of this stuff I have included in my own novel, King of the Forgotten Darkness. So King of the Forgotten Darkness is about a man who has to illegally enter a dark and wild magical world in order to save what's left of his family. Click on the link in the description to learn more. When you include this kind of folktale stuff and this psychologically resonant stuff into your stories, I think it helps give your creative writing a powerful and resonant kick. So there you go. If you enjoyed this, click the like, subscribe, sign up for my newsletter. Be sure to check out the links below. I've got all kinds of links down there. Young to Live By is a big one. Definitely check them out. It's a great channel for more stuff about Jung and complexes and all that kind of stuff. And we'll see you next time.